Welcome back to Tanstwocents, the unfiltered playbook for winning in GovCon. If you're a government contractor who thinks labor and employment law are just HR's problems, this episode is going to be your wake-up call. Today, we're talking about labor law traps, those costly, often hidden issues that can derail your pricing, impact your ability to perform, and open the door to audits or investigations. And whether it's Service Contract Act, Davis-Bacon, or missteps in remote employees, what you don't know will cost you. And joining me here is someone who's not just watching these issues unfold. She's in the trenches daily with contractors nationwide. Nichole Atallah is a partner at PilieroMazza and a leading labor and employment law authority in the federal contracting space. She helps companies navigate compliance, survive investigations, and structure their operations to reduce risk while staying competitive. Nichole, welcome to the show. And for our intellectuals who haven't worked with you yet or know you, can you share a little bit about your background and how you support government contractors?
Sure, and thanks for having me. It's always fun to get out from behind my computer, do something a little different. So I have been serving the GovCon community for 16 and a half years or so. I started as a baby lawyer at the firm. I had a background in labor and employment. And Pam Mazza, the founder of our law firm, was looking for a labor and employment lawyer to teach GovCon to. And so I had no idea what I was getting into. I think I'd been at a law school about 3 years, and I was working in Atlanta, had gone to undergraduate in DC and really wanted to come back to the DC area. So I said, sure, let's do it. And very, very quickly learned how important it was to understand GovCons as an industry before you could really advise on those things that are unique to government contractors, that kind of crossover labor and employment stuff. And so like 95% of my clients are government contractors. It's basically all I do. And of course I'm now like half GovCon lawyer, half labor and employment lawyer, but you just like, that's what happens over time, right? You have to learn it to be able to really advise clients what's in their best interest and how to manage these issues.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I don't think any of us have a clear, straight path to GovCon, um, which is why I love this industry so much. We all kind of come from so many different backgrounds. We all have different reasons, and different things that attract us to GovCon. For me, every day is a different day. Every client is like has different challenges and issues, and so I love the surprise, I guess, the spontaneity of.
Yeah, I mean, I tell every time I interview someone for a job in labor and employment, we're always looking for this unicorn. Well, who has SCA background? Who has DBA background? And I tell my partners, you're never going to find them. You have to take someone who's smart and creative and really interested to learn new things, because every single day it's either, well, how do I deal with state law and Drug-Free Workplace Act? How do I deal with all of these government folks that are leaving the government and now wanting to come into the private sector? And we've got all these ethics opinions. How do we manage that in the GovCon community while we're trying to pick up new talent? So every day is like a new day. I love it. But if you don't like that kind of triage, think outside the box kind of work, you're probably going to hate it.
Yeah. No, exactly. And I think it's especially to your point when you're hiring and interviewing a potential candidate, it is that I look for someone who understands and knows how to critically think, because I think
Right.
that's like one of the key things about what we do in GovCon and those who are really successful is not a cookie cutter follow checklist type of, kind of person, but can you critically think and make those difficult decisions, or like you said, think outside the box, or be able to kind of see things from a different, perspective to solve a potential problem.
You can teach content. You can't teach some
Yeah.
of the other stuff, right? So it's critically important.
Yeah, exactly. So, Nichole, I want to kind of, you and I just always speak very frankly about things, which our intellectuals are going to truly enjoy this conversation. Two smart, opinionated women in the same room at the same time is always going to be like fireworks. But let's start with like the big elephant in the room, right? Labor law, I'm not a labor attorney. I don't like HR. Like the thought of HR kind of freaks me out. Why do you think I have my own business? Because I'm an HR nightmare.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times like labor law gets boxed into like HR or seen as kind of like a compliance afterthought, right? Especially like in GovCon. But in reality, though, labor issues directly impact pricing, competitiveness, your ability to kind of like hold and retain a contract. So, why do you think so many government contractors overlook or underestimate this part of the business? And what are some of the most common mistakes you see, especially with like SEA and Davis Bacon?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest problems is that HR is seen as an overhead expense as opposed to to a strategic business solution, right?
Hmm.
And so, really I have this whole seminar I do about, labor and employment for the CEO to really try to explain why it's critical. Like, how
Ah,
do you if you're in the people business, even if you make widgets, um, like and in my business too, our product is our people. Our product is those people that we're hiring, those people that we're saying like, oh, you have a great analytical brain, I can teach you some things, I can make you are my product, right?
hmm.
So how do you price your widget if you don't know what people cost, right?
That's true.
How do you develop a strategic business plan if you don't know what your turnover costs you in a year, what your litigation risk is going to be like? You should be planning on some sort of litigation or audit within the first 5 to 7 years of your business life cycle. If it doesn't happen, great. I have people call me all the time that says, this is the first time I've had an audit. I've been in business 20 years. Congratulations. But that's not most businesses, right?
Wow.
Yeah. So most businesses within the first 5 to 7 years are going to have some issue. I promised you a retention bonus, but then you turned out to be a really terrible employee. I want you to pay it back. How do I get that money back? Right. Um,
Hmm.
so this is really about a strategy for success. So you do have to spend a little bit of money on the front end to get all of those structural issues in place. Right.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have those standard operating procedures, if your HR team, even if you're not a big company, right, you should have HR resources, people that know this, whether they're outside or inside your organization, because most companies don't spend on HR when they're first starting out. I know I did our HR for the first, I don't know how many years together with our finance person, right? Like when you're tiny, you don't have HR,
Yeah.
but there are resources to make sure that you're not making those really costly missteps. And it should be part of your strategic business plan.
Yeah.
That HR resource or function should be part of the conversation every time you're going in to price something for a bid, every time you're thinking about what kind of benefits you need in place. Do you offer benefits? Because those turnover costs are so high, right? It's
Hmm.
not about whether you don't win the award, but how much is that turnover costing you every single year? And what are you doing internally to cause that turnover? Sometimes you can't
Right.
help it, right? But sometimes there are
Yeah.
systemic issues, right? Like we've kept this really productive PM on site for the last 5 years, but this PM is also a toxic human with respect to the rest of the workforce. What is he costing you or she costing you?
Right.
Even if they're a great performer, right? So that's strategic business stuff, not, HR processing payroll and making sure you have a handbook updated every year.
Yeah, I think that's going to be one of our common themes that we talk about in this episode is on our podcast we talk about business strategy, and everything has to be strategic. And
Right.
so yeah, you're right. There's a cost of doing business, and then there's like a opportunity cost when things like a toxic person or turnover goes really high. I know we were talking before about how I like to watch mindless TV and different things like that. And I'm in the middle of binging like Severance right now. And
That's so
it just, oh my God. Like, and so I think this discussion here today kind of takes me back a little bit because Severance is just like one big HR management nightmare.
it
Um,
totally is.
yes. So for the intellectuals who are following Severance, you'll get some of my humor here today. And if you're not, you may want to check it out. So,
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
All right, well, let's just jump right into our first segment here, which is framing the stakes for real world consequences and common pitfalls. And like, here's the thing: getting labor wrong, like you said, isn't just like a risk of like penalties. It can cost you the win. And you said, like from a pricing perspective, I've seen proposals fall apart over incorrect wage determinations, poorly written fringe narratives. Compensation plans are a really big requirement in a lot of bids. So, let's talk about labor law and how it's kind of become a strategic advantage, more so than just key personnel or key qualifications. There's some of the
Yes.
other, supporting, factors behind that. So, how do you think BD and proposal teams should integrate like labor compliance into their bid strategies? And what type of collaboration should occur between HR, legal, pricing, proposal ops? Because a lot of times in the bid process, everybody operates in silos, right? And no one wants to invite HR to like the meeting. And so
And
I'm
HR
just
is
I'm just
so
being
mad.
honest.
Yeah, and HR gets so mad about it, right? So, in any given day, I talk to probably half C-suite teams and half HR folks, just depending on what's going on.
Okay.
And every time I talk to an HR person that's onboarding onto a contract, and they'll call me and panicked and they'll say, Nichole, these people were all non exempt SCA people under the prior contract. And I'm finding this out today when my team is out there onboarding people
Oh
and they're not
no.
getting their SCA vacation and they're not getting their health and welfare. And by the way, we classified them as exempt and they're going to get the salary and they think they're getting hosed. And that is
Oh.
an automatic, first of all, like that kind of surprise should never happen to HR. Like HR, before they onboard, should know what kind of challenges they might be facing when they're trying to hire and
Mhm.
recruit and commit personnel, right? They should know what they're walking into. But to your point, like HR is always like, if they just would have talked to me, right?
If they
I
just
could have
ask the
told them,
question, right?
right? They get so mad, right? And because to them, they are, HR to them can be very strategic. They can provide
Yeah.
some, not, no one of us is expected or can be an expert in all of these different areas. It's just too much to know and learn. So the way I like to envision it is there are these touch points with the entire team where folks are coming together before you are even at pricing, right? When you are deciding whether to go after something or not, can we be competitive given where our labor is, given the
Mm.
incumbent workforce? What kind of data do we have about these folks so that I mean, you know how much it costs to go after
Mhm.
something. If you know out of the gate because you've looked, this is an SCA contract or a DBA contract, for example, and we don't really do much of that work, so our benefits really aren't structured for that, and the amount of investment we would have to put into that just doesn't make sense. Or you pick up a solicitation that has a collective bargaining agreement in it,
Oh,
that
no
should be
thanks.
huge red flags to you that like you're going to have to get into labor world. Like there is an organized
Right.
workforce on site, but you would be shocked at the number of clients that call me and say, "Hey, we just were awarded this contract and there's a CBA in there and we're not even sure if we bid like what the CBA says." I'm like how did you get to that
How did
point?
you get that
Like
far? Right.
how did you do that? I don't understand, how you made it that far
Yeah.
without kind of having everybody in a room. If you have those touch points with all of your kind of principal key folks that you really need to build a good proposal or build a strategy for
Yeah.
going after work, I don't know how you don't have HR built into some piece of that, right?
So exactly, and I'm not going to make excuses for BD capture people because that's the side that I normally sit on. Um, but I think what it is that, and I truly believe that certain people are gravitate to certain professions because of their personality. Like it's just like how they're wired. And from my limited amount of HR experience, because like I said, I am an HR nightmare. Is that HR likes to ask some very detailed questions, And a lot of times BDs don't have those answers. And so it's very overwhelming for them. They're like, I don't know. I'll figure it out. Like, it's totally
Right.
BD. Like, we'll figure it out later, right? Like, let's just with the contractor, let's just get there. And HR's like, well, no, you don't understand. There are some major ramifications. And so you're right. I think I've only worked with like a handful of companies ever in my 20 years of doing this work where there was a very strong HR presence and a very prominent presence
Right.
very early, middle, and the end of an entire process. And it was kind of refreshing. It was a little off-putting at first because I was like, well, why is HR here? I was like, and it's like there's not a whole lot of staffing, and stuff. And
Right.
I didn't really appreciate that. But I think you make like a really good point in it, in that there are some underlying things that I think, as part of like the BD process, we do need different perspectives, and HR is just one of many perspectives.
Yeah, and there are different types of HR folks too, just like there are
Okay.
different types of BD folks, right? Like you have HR folks that are very tactical,
Okay.
right? They're not as strategically oriented. They are used to making sure that payroll gets run on time and there's a policy in place.
Right.
They probably need something different from their BD team than come into a room and talk strategy with us, because their instinct is going to be to go tactical,
Right.
right? Like, what is my onboarding process going to look like? Are these, do you have a
Hmm.
job description for me yet? Do we need to build a job description? And your BD, their heads are going to explode.
They're like, no.
And then you have more strategic HR people. There tend to be people that aren't as good at the day to day. They've kind of moved a little bit
Mhm.
beyond the tactical. And so knowing who you have and what resources you have can be helpful in figuring out how to integrate HR or labor considerations into your standard operating procedures, right? So I have some
Yeah.
clients that have built like, we know what we need to know. Like we basically give HR a questionnaire. We say, this is the information we need. I do have a couple of clients that train their HR people to understand what BD needs to know to be successful. And they spend some time with their BD folks to know what happens on the back end of the process,
Ah,
right?
that's really smart.
So that if I know what information you need to do your job and you know what information I'm going to need, especially if BD's comp is in part
Hmm.
driven by the success of that first or
Hmm.
second year contract, right? So it's kind of where compensation plans can really drive good outcomes for
Yeah.
clients. If they know that it's not just about grabbing that contract, but how profitable or successful that contract can be on the back end, they're going to be less likely to ignore HR when HR says, like, you have a huge audit risk here, or you're going to have a lot of trouble onboarding people here, because it's going to impact their comp at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So you can kind of think about your goals and comp and what outcomes you're trying to achieve and who you've got at the table to try to drive the best outcomes.
Yeah. Good point. And BD is always driven by the compensation and the rewards at the end.